Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are embarking on, well, a really foundational intellectual journey. We're going to challenge the very ground reality seems to rest on, moving past that simple idea that perception is just a reflection,
Wow.
and instead plunging into a world where reality is shaped by philosophical gaps, these subjective collisions, and maybe truths that are just too volatile to handle directly without, the mask of fiction.
That's a great way to put it. Our sources today, they're really pulling together threads from German idealism and French psychoanalysis. We're putting Kant, Hegel, and Lacan, essentially, in the same room.
Which is always interesting.
Always. And our goal really is to unpack the basic structure of how reality gets constituted, how the I, the subjective self, gets formed, and crucially, how we cope when those structures inevitably fail or break down. We want to hit those aha moments, where dense arguments suddenly click and become, applicable insights. And yeah, when we use jargon, we'll definitely unpack it for you.
Absolutely. Let's start with perhaps one of the biggest shifts in modern thinking. That moment, philosophy kind of stopped seeing appearance as just a mistake and started seeing it as the very structure we have to live inside. Let's get into that. Okay, so before Kant, if philosophers talked about, the gap between what we see and what's really real, they often use this term shine, appearance.
Shine, yeah. And it carried this really heavy negative weight.
Illusion, right, like a flawed copy, something defective you just had to get rid of, bypass somehow.
Exactly. It was pejorative. If you were, say, Plato or even early scientists, your job was basically to denounce shine. Look past the messy illusion to find the true reality underneath.
Whether that was Plato's perfect forms or the objective laws of physics beneath the sensory stuff.
The task was rejection, pure and simple.
But Kant just flips this whole mission on his head. He introduces a Erscheinung.
Erscheinung still translates as appearance, but it means appearance as phenomenon. And that little shift, it's huge. Because by using Erscheinung, Kant basically strips appearance of that negative quality. The table you see, the way light hits the water. These aren't, for Kant, defective copies of some truer thing.
Okay.
They are real phenomena. They're defined by the fundamental ways our own minds, our subjective apparatus, structures the world. They're how things appear to us within reality.
That's a massive shift, because if appearance is our reality in this sense, you can't just dismiss it anymore.
Right. It kind of kills 1,000 years of metaphysics that was all about trying to leapfrog our own perception.
So what's the philosophical job now, if not getting past appearance?
It becomes transcendental genesis.
Okay, break that down.
We stop asking what's really out there beyond my senses, and we start asking a different question. What are the conditions of possibility?
Yeah.
What has to be true about us, about our minds, for things to appear to us the way they do?
So investigating the framework itself, space, time, causality, that kind of thing.
Exactly. Recognizing that the world isn't just given to us passively. It's actively structured by these innate categories that are already, you could say, installed in our subjective software.
And this Kantian move, ironically, makes us look back at Plato, doesn't it? Our sources suggest Plato kind of started this split empirical world versus eternal forms, but then he misunderstood his own discovery.
That's the argument. Plato was revolutionary, no doubt. He saw that crucial gap between messy, everyday reality and this stable, eternal order of forms or ideas.
The blueprint, kind of.
Right. But then the argument goes, he made the classic philosophical mistake.
Right.
He ontologized the ideas.
Meaning?
He treated the conceptual blueprint, this virtual organizing principle, as if it were a second, stable, substantial, true reality, like it existed in some other dimension we needed to get to. He turned a logical structure into a transcendent thing.
So he made the split, which was necessary, but then he hardened it, made the ideal seem like another object out there somewhere. #B ideas as virtual entities. The materialist truth of Platonism.
And this leads us to some really interesting materialist takes on Plato, especially someone like Gilles Deleuze in The Logic of Sense. He tries to rescue Plato's insight by basically inverting the whole thing.
Okay, how?
It's not about substantial, real ideas versus fake material bodies. For Deleuze, it's more like you have substantial material bodies on one hand, and then you have this pure, impassive surface of sense on the other, the dimension of pure becoming.
That sounds incredibly abstract, even more than Plato, maybe. How do we grasp this sense?
The key is its status. It's incorporeal. It doesn't exist like a rock or you or me exists. It doesn't take up space.
So it doesn't exist.
It merely subsists. Think of it like a potentiality, a pure event running alongside matter, but it's not matter itself. If Plato made the idea heavy and transcendent, Deleuze makes it pure lightness, pure surface, a non-existing entity.
Okay, if it doesn't exist in that way, how does it structure the things that do exist? What's its function?
To make this concrete, our sources give a great example, the mathematical attractor.
Ah, okay, like in chaos theory.
Yeah, exactly. Imagine a complex system, weather patterns, stock markets, whatever. An attractor is that shape, that form, that all the data points seem to be heading towards, orbiting around, but they never quite reach it.
They just circulate endlessly around this invisible point.
Right. The attractor itself has no physical substance. It's purely virtual. It's just the pattern they follow.
I see. It's the rule, the organizing principle, but not the thing itself.
Precisely. And here's the kicker, the insight that runs through this whole deep dive. Because this form, this attractor, is virtual and insubstantial. That's what makes it the real of that field.
Wait, the virtual thing is the real?
Yes. It's the immovable focal point that dictates how all the actual material elements move and behave. The material reality only holds together because of this virtual idea organizing it.
Okay, so if the idea is this virtual potentiality, how does that change how we think about the world?
It radically shifts the whole philosophical game. We stop chasing some mythical true reality behind the curtain.
Right.
And instead, we focus entirely on, how does appearance even emerge in the first place? If the material world is the only thing that properly exists, then the organizing principle giving it shapes must have this status of pure appearing, pure virtuality.
So the real isn't the solid core we can't reach.
The real is the gap, the virtual dimension, the organizing lack that makes the material world possible at all.
Okay, so reality is structured by these virtual principles. Now let's turn inward to the subject, the I. Our text really insists that true identity isn't about some seamless merging of subject and object.
No, it's not that kind of blissful oneness you might find in some traditions.
Why not?
Because any unity has to be preceded by a cut, a division. This is the concept of
Exceptional sundering.
Exactly. The act of judgment, making a distinction, is the original division that first makes an object and a subject possible. Before that cut, there's just, well, an undifferentiated mess. Basically nothing.
So to even be a subject and I, you have to first draw a line, define yourself against a not I.
Precisely. The I only emerges by setting up a boundary. It's a reciprocal relationship, Beziehung, the German they call it. The I is determined by the not I, and the not I is determined by the I.
It's a whole defined by its split. Subjectivity starts with tearing reality in two.
Yes. And what happens when this I, which tries to posit itself as absolute, immediately bumps up against its own limit? That's where Fichte's concept of anstos comes in.
The hazardous knock.
Right, the run-in. It's this critical moment. The absolute I tries to make everything part of its own thought, its own ideal reality. But bang, it immediately encounters the real, something foreign, something that resists being totally absorbed by the I.
And you'd think this resistance, this foreign body, comes from the outside world, right? Just brute facts hitting you.
That's the intuitive thought. But the paradox our sources highlight is, it doesn't.
It doesn't come from outside.
The anstos is described as stricto sensu extimate. We need to pause on that too.
Okay.
It means simultaneously extremely intimate, right there at the very core of the subject, essential for its definition, and totally foreign, impossible to assimilate.
So it's inside and outside at the same time.
Kind of. It confirms that subjectivity isn't just pure self-creation. The subject needs this internal obstacle, this hazardous knock it can't digest, because that very resistance is what forces the subject to recognize itself as limited, as situated. It's the foreign body lodged right at the heart of the self.
Wow. Okay, so the I only realizes it can't be absolute because of this internal irreducible obstacle. #B negation, contradiction, and the power of understanding.
And this clash, this limit, brings us straight to negation. How negation works, Plato wrestled with this way back, right? How can you even talk about non-being?
The argument being you can't really talk about pure nothingness.
Right, so Plato's solution was clever. Not being isn't absolute absence, it's difference within being.
So if I say this cup is not blue, I'm not saying the cup doesn't exist.
Right.
I'm doing a relational negation. I'm saying it's a color different from blue, but still within the realm of, colored things.
Exactly. It keeps non-being contained within being. Now, Hegel takes this power of separation, of negation, and really elevates it. For Hegel, the absolute power, the foundation of thought, is the act of understanding. And understanding is the act of separating elements, tearing things apart.
So analysis, breaking things down, is fundamental.
It's not just something the mind does. It's the foundational, energetic act of thought itself. And this leads to that really counterintuitive Hegelian insight about the dialectic.
Which usually gets presented as analysis tearing apart, gets overcome by synthesis, putting back together.
Like a peaceful resolution. But Hegel says the real transition to reason happens when that tearing apart isn't just seen as something we do, but as the inherent power of negativity within things themselves.
Okay.
And the highest act of synthesis, the moment of true unification, is paradoxically the most radical act of tearing apart. It's a violent imposition of unity.
Wow. So real synthesis isn't gentle merging. It's forcing disparate parts into a new whole through negation.
Yes, it's not just adding things up. A true dialectical synthesis only emerges through the negation, the loss, the violent restructuring of what came before. Maximum antagonism creates the new unity, ##C, the big other, and positing the presuppositions.
This idea of a violent imposition of structure, it leads us pretty naturally to the symbolic order, what Lacan called the big other, which kind of maps onto Hegel's idea of objective spirit.
Right, this seemingly external structure, laws, language, social norms, culture, it feels like it stands above us, dictating the rules.
Yeah.
Immutable.
Yeah.
But its substance is, quote, totally subjectivized. We have to grasp its virtual status. The big other isn't a concrete thing.
So it's like the attractor again?
Very much so. It's the set of rules, the symbolic system, that only exists because we, the subjects within it, continuously sustain it through our actions and, crucially, our belief.
Belief.
This is what Hegel called positing the presuppositions. We actively create and uphold the very ground that supports us. We make the rules that define who we are.
So where is the big other, if I look for it?
It's nowhere and everywhere. It's not in a specific building or a person. It subsists as the shared symbolic reality we all inhabit. Think about money again.
Just paper, really.
Or pixels on a screen. We all agree, we believe it has value, so it does. Or think about the rules of the game, like offside in football. It's an arbitrary line, but it functions because everyone accepts it.
The Escher drawing, the two hands drawing each other, that fits perfectly here, doesn't it?
It's the perfect illustration of this closed loop. The subject exists within the reality created by the big other. Your identity, your rights, even the language you think in, it's all pre-structured.
But here's the paradox.
The paradox is,
Yeah.
if you, as a subject, genuinely decided to stop believing, if everyone suddenly decided money is worthless or laws are just noise, your own reality, your place within that system, even your sanity, would just dissolve. The symbolic fiction isn't just a layer on top of reality. It constitutes reality for us. We depend on the fiction to even have a stable place to stand.
So the moment you see the fiction as fiction, your own footing gets really shaky. It takes constant effort, constant belief to keep the whole thing going.
And when we talk about sustaining reality through these symbolic fictions, inevitably, we crash into truths that are too big, too shattering for that fiction to hold. This brings us to Wittgenstein's famous line, "Whereof one cannot speak, thereof one must be silent."
Which usually gets read as like an ethical command, right? Don't try to talk about things that are beyond words, like the sacred or the mystical.
That's the common reading.
Yeah.
But our sources offer a different take. It's a superfluous prohibition.
Meaning?
It forbids something that's already impossible. If something is genuinely unspeakable, truly outside language, then nobody could speak of it anyway. Saying, you must be silent about it, is redundant.
Okay, I see. It's like telling someone not to flap their arms and fly.
Exactly. And this paradox becomes incredibly relevant when we think about trauma, especially historical trauma like the Holocaust.
Yeah, the sources contrast two figures here, Elie Wiesel,
who argued that literature about the Holocaust is basically impossible, maybe even profane. Language breaks down, it can't capture the horror.
Versus Jorge Semprún,
who argued the exact opposite.
Yeah.
That only art, only fiction can truly represent it. Why? Because a straightforward documentary approach, just listing the raw facts, actually neutralizes the traumatic impact. The raw facts are too real, too indigestible.
Which supports Lacan's idea that truth often has the structure of a fiction.
Precisely. Why does a shattering truth need the disguise of fiction? What's the protection there?
Yeah, what is it?
Because the unvarnished real truth is often just too traumatic, too destructive to confront head-on. We need the aesthetic frame, the safety of fiction, to even approach it.
Like watching violence in a movie versus seeing it in real life.
Perfect example. A real snuff film showing actual torture and death is obscene, unbearable for most. But fictionalized violence, it's everywhere in entertainment. And maybe that pleasure we take in aesthetic fiction isn't just escapism.
What is it then?
It could be a profound psychological survival mechanism, a way for us to process, to cope with unsymbolizable horror without completely shattering the symbolic framework that holds our reality together.
So fiction lets us function by keeping the raw trauma slightly at bay. And this raw truth, it doesn't just affect our present, it actually reaches back and corrupts memory itself.
This is a devastating point in the sources. Trauma invades the past. Robert Antelm's example is chilling.
The doorbell.
Yeah. He had this fundamentally pleasant memory, the sound of his lover ringing the doorbell. But later, the Gestapo rang that same bell when they came to arrest him. And that later traumatic event retroactively poisoned the earlier happy memory.
So he could never just hear the pleasant doorbell in his memory again.
Never again in isolation. The trauma acts like a virus, injecting itself backwards into the structure of the memory. The painful memory colonizes the pleasant one.
That means the past isn't fixed. It's constantly being rewritten by later traumas.
Exactly. Memory isn't some stable archive you can just access. It's a dynamic, unstable battlefield where the most violent, unsymbolizable moments exert this retroactive control over your own subjective history. #B, vacillating the semblances and inconsistency.
Okay, let's shift from trauma back to language and ideology. There's this inherent contradiction, isn't there, in using language to preach pure egoism. Our source quotes Nietzsche.
To preach egoism is to practice altruism.
Right, explain that.
It's simple, really. The medium undermines the message. Language itself is inherently universal, intersubjective. It's a shared tool built for communication, for connection, for the common.
Okay.
But you're using this fundamentally communal tool to proclaim a message of pure self-interest, of separation. The universal medium you're forced to use actually contradicts or at least complicates the particular message you're trying to send.
It's like the classic philosophical joke about the solipsist trying to convince other people that only he exists.
Exactly. He has used shared language to deny the very basis of shared language. It's a structural knot.
So if all discourse gets caught in these kinds of loops, these semblances, where do we go? Do we just keep searching for the one true discourse that escapes the fiction?
Well, Lacan, especially in his later work, says no. That's not the goal. Trying to find the one exception to the rule of semblance, that truth beyond the fiction, that's kind of the masculine universalizing move.
So what's the alternative?
The move is to grasp the inconsistency itself, the non-all quality of these discourses. We stop trying to peel back the veil to find some hard kernel of truth underneath.
And instead,
we focus on the gap, the point of failure, the internal flaw that prevents any system, any discourse, from achieving perfect closure or totality. This is what Lacan called to vacillate the semblances.
Okay, vacillate the semblances. Not get beyond them, but shake them up. Analyze their points of failure.
Precisely. We analyze the breakdown point, the internal inconsistency. And this connects to that tricky psychoanalytic term, jouissance.
Which is often translated as enjoyment, but it's more than that.
Yeah, it's more like an excess satisfaction, often painful, compulsive even. It's derived specifically from the breach, the gap, the relationship with the impossible thing, the failure itself.
So if we vacillate the semblances, the jouissance isn't found in the system working smoothly.
No. It's found in the impossibility of the system ever being perfectly complete or coherent. It's a kind of satisfaction derived directly from the inconsistency.
Let's take this engine of negation, contradiction, and inconsistency into the political realm. Specifically, Hegel's view of civil society, the market economy.
Right. For Hegel, this was the sphere of understanding. It looks like chaos, doesn't it? Everyone pursuing their own atomized, egotistic interests. Alienation seems to be the name of the game.
Pure disintegration.
On the surface, yes. But the classic Hegelian move, the dialectical twist, is to recognize that this sphere, in its very disintegration, is already the reconciliation of the particular and the universal.
How? That sounds completely contradictory.
It's the invisible hand idea, basically.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals chase their private goals, their own self-interest. But in doing so, unintentionally, they contribute to the public good, the welfare of the whole system. The universal emerges from the chaos of particulars.
So the solution isn't some external force like the state stepping in to impose order or trying to transcend the messy market altogether.
No. The reconciliation is imminent. It's already there, inside the alienation itself.
So what needs to change?
It's a radical shift in perspective for the subject. You have to shift your viewpoint to actually endorse the loss, endorse the alienation of just pursuing your own interests as the very condition of the universal good emerging. You recognize your self-interest is only possible because you're part of this larger, messy mechanism.
Okay, that's quite a mental flip. The sources use that Rabinovich joke to illustrate this, right?
Yes, it's perfect. Rabinovich wants to emigrate from the Soviet Union. The commissar asks why. Rabinovich says, I have two reasons. First, I'm afraid that if the socialist order ever collapses, they'll blame us Jews for everything.
Okay.
The Commissar laughs and says, don't be ridiculous. Socialism is eternal. It will never collapse.
And Rabinovich replies,
That's my second reason.
Huh. Okay, I get it. The real reason he wants out, because socialism won't collapse, can only come out after the first, more acceptable reason is denied.
Exactly. The truth emerges through the negation, through the shift in perspective prompted by the denial. It was hidden beneath the first explanation. #tag B, the rabble, in singular universality.
Staying with Hegel's politics, let's talk about the pobel, the rabble. This excluded group, the poor, the marginalized. Hegel saw them as a necessary part of the modern state.
Which seems odd for a philosopher often seen as glorifying the rational state. But yes, they are the part of no part.
The part of society that doesn't have a proper part, a proper place.
Exactly. They are the necessary, maybe irrational excess that gets produced by the state's very attempt to organize everything rationally. They are fundamentally those who are denied recognition, denied a place within the system.
But why necessary? Couldn't a perfectly rational state just eliminate poverty and exclusion?
For Hegel, the rabble isn't just an unfortunate byproduct. They are the reflexive determination of the whole system. They embody the point where the social totality bumps up against its own limits, its own failures and contradictions.
They're like the symptom.
Precisely. They are the living proof that the system cannot achieve perfect closure. If the state claims universality, the existence of the rabble immediately shows the contingency, the failure of that claim. They embody the singular universality, the universal claim failing at a specific, singular point.
And politically, Hegel drew a pretty radical conclusion from this, didn't he? He actually justified their rebellion.
He did, in rational terms even. His argument was, because society systematically denies the rabble recognition and dignity, their ethical substance, their connection to the social order, is effectively destroyed.
So they don't owe loyalty to a system that excludes them.
Exactly. By denying them a place, society implicitly releases them from their duties towards that society. Therefore, their rebellion isn't just an emotional outburst, it's a rational response to an irrational, exclusionary social structure. #C. The limits of transcendental and ethical frameworks. Moving from the political back to the purely philosophical frame, we need to touch on Kant versus Hegel regarding finitude, limitation. Kant located finitude primarily in the transcendental subject. Our human limits, space, time, perception.
Right, we can't know the thing in itself because our cognitive tools are limited.
But Hegel thought Kant made a mistake here.
What was the critique?
Hegel argued Kant illegitimately projected our subjective temporal limitations onto the pure logical categories themselves, causality, substance, etc. Hegel's move was actually subtractive. He wanted to analyze the categories in their own pure, immanent, maybe non-temporal logic, removing the human baggage he thought Kant had smuggled in.
Interesting, okay. And this idea of inherent limits brings us back to the self, the cogito, the I think. Our sources stress it's perpetually unknowable as a thing. We can't get an objective snapshot of ourselves.
And crucially, this isn't because the outside world, the I, is fundamentally inaccessible. It's because the subject itself is caught in this loop. The subject is the gap, the process of negation.
So if a self could know itself objectively, like a scientist studying an object,
it would instantly stop being a self. Subjectivity is that vanishing point, that constant process of self-differentiation, not a fixed object to be known.
This tension between choice, freedom, and these structural limits plays out powerfully in the contrast between ancient and Christian tragedy.
Yeah, think of ancient tragedy, Oedipus, Antigone. Fate is this massive, objective, external force. The hero struggles, maybe nobly, but they're ultimately crushed by something beyond their control.
Destiny.
Right. But then you get Christian tragedy, exemplified in the sources by Signe de Coufontaine from Claudel's play. Here, there's no external fate pulling the strings.
Her fate is her choice.
Entirely. She is fully, radically responsible for her act of total self-sacrifice.
How is that more tragic than Oedipus, who couldn't skate his fate?
Because her choice stems from absolute innermost freedom. It leaves no room for that classical tragic beauty, no catharsis, no elevation. She sacrifices everything, her love, her honor, her life, for this pure, almost incomprehensible traumatic love. And crucially, she refuses to give her sacrifice any redeeming meaning. It becomes, as the sources graphically put it, a disgusting excremental stain. Ancient tragedy gives us a noble hero fighting destiny. This modern Christian tragedy collapses the hero into the raw, meaningless void of their own free choice, leaving behind only the unbearable trauma, the stain of pure love with no payoff. That radical emptiness is arguably far more devastating.
Let's move towards the end here with Lacan, extending Kant's critique now to the realm of desire itself. Kant showed our experience is structured by non-empirical categories.
And Lacan argues our desire isn't just aimed at actual empirical objects we want, but it's sustained by something non-empirical too, the objet pédia, the object cause of desire.
Okay, and desire itself it aims for. What the impossible thing, complete satisfaction.
Right, it strives for that impossible, mythical object of total fulfillment. And of course it always fails. That failure is just part of being human.
But then there's the Freudian drive, and this does something weird with the failure.
It performs a kind of psychological judo, as you put it earlier. The drive turns this inevitable failure into a perverse kind of triumph.
How does failure become success?
Because the satisfaction, the jouissance, in the drive doesn't come from actually reaching the goal, from getting the thing. It comes from the repeated effort, the endless circulation around the object.
So the drive's real aim isn't the destination, it's the genie, the circuit itself.
Exactly. Think of the oral drive. Psychoanalysis says the core satisfaction isn't finally getting the milk, but the repetitive act of sucking itself, the rhythm, the process.
Okay.
The drive is this relentless energy that just insists on repeating its circuit, often completely ignoring reality or consequences. And significantly, the drive is the very force that breaks any sense of a smooth, continuous all. It introduces radical imbalance, insisting on its own loop. #B, sexual differences, ontological antagonism.
This inherent imbalance, this break in the all, leads us finally to sexual difference, which psychoanalysis treats not just biologically, but as a fundamental ontological issue, a blind spot in philosophy, perhaps.
Largely, yes. Philosophy, even up to someone like Heidegger, tends to ignore the deep structural dimension of sexual difference. But for psychoanalysis, sexuation becoming positioned as masculine or feminine in the symbolic order isn't an afterthought. It's the fundamental price you pay to even become a subject within language and society.
And this difference isn't about harmony or complementarity.
No. It represents the primordial antagonism, the point of irreducible difference, the non-all, that undermines any fantasy of a complete harmonious social or symbolic totality. The two sexes, structurally speaking, don't fit together neatly.
Why not? What's the structure?
It's defined by a profound asymmetry, which Lacan articulates using logic. The masculine side is structured by the universal all. All subjects are subject to the symbolic law, the phallic function, with perhaps a constituted exception that proves the rule. It's a totalizing logic.
Okay, and the feminine side?
The feminine side is defined as non-all, patut. Her relation to the symbolic law, the phallic function, is not totalizing. She is within it, but not wholly contained by it. There's something that escapes the universal logic.
Which means you can't just count them as two equal halves.
Exactly. Because the feminine side isn't fully captured by the all structure, the whole setup is asymmetrical. It's not one and one making two. It's more like one, the masculine universal, plus something else that isn't fully countable within that logic, an irreducible excess. 1 plus A.
And this non-closure, this asymmetry, proves that any attempt at a totally unified system is flawed from the start.
Yes. Sexual difference is the rock on which those fantasies of totality founder. And this structural gap, this non-closure on the feminine side, helps explain that paradoxical feminine gesture you often see in literature or life, the sudden withdrawal, the inexplicable act of perseverance against all odds.
What's happening there?
It can be seen as a kind of ultimate autonomy. The subject finds satisfaction, jouissance, not by conforming to the system's expectations, but precisely in the gap, in the breach. It's a persistence or a withdrawal that generates its own satisfaction from the inconsistency of the symbolic order, not as a sacrifice to it. It's an insistence on the non-all. #outro.
Wow. We have covered an immense amount of ground today. We traced reality's structure right from Kant, seeing appearance not as illusion, but as the phenomenon we inhabit. We saw the subject emerging from that strange extimate collision with the real, and we unpacked how our social world, the big other, is this symbolic fiction we have to constantly prop up with our belief.
Yeah, the core thread really has been this relentless focus on inconsistency, on the gap. What really stands out is how these profound philosophical systems, Hegel's dialectic needing the tier, Lacan's non-all, they don't define the world by what they successfully unify,
but by their failures.
By their necessary gaps, their inconsistencies. These aren't just abstract models. They're like the operating system of our reality, explaining why certain conflicts, whether political or deeply personal, feel unavoidable. because the structure itself requires that instability.
We sort of ended up seeing the real not as some solid thing beyond our reach, but as the very gap, the very inconsistency that prevents total access, but also allows for movement and change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that brings us to a final, maybe provocative thought, especially within this kind of transcendental materialist frame we've been exploring.
Okay.
If the real is fundamentally this void, this gap that organizes being, then maybe the ultimate philosophical question needs a slight shift. Not the classic, why is there something rather than nothing? Yeah. But maybe, why is there nothing rather than something?
Yeah.
How is it that the deeper we probe, whether it's our own subjectivity, political systems, or even, fascinatingly, modern physics like quantum mechanics, the more we seem to encounter a void, a fundamental indeterminacy, a nothingness, and yet this very void seems to be the source, the wellspring of all possible reality, all potential, all material existence.
So the void isn't absence, it's potential.
Perhaps. That fundamental emptiness as the very condition of possibility for everything that appears, that might just be the core of a truly consistent transcendental materialism. Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about. Thank you for that deep dive.
Thank you.